Okay, so we'd had a little bit of success, myself and my twin brother Philip, and together we were known as the Oliver Twins. We'd been writing some games while we were still at school, but we'd only been doing, first off with type-in listings and then getting them onto cassettes. And we were very proud and happy that we'd get them into the shops like W.H. Smith's and Woolworths and John Menzies. Some of those shops have gone now, back in the mid-80s. But it was a case of we'd only get a few £100 for each one, which is pretty good when you're still at school. But at the end of school, our parents wanted us to go to university. It was kind of expected, but we were kind of enjoying playing with Spectrums and Amstrads. So we wanted to see if we could make some decent money out of writing games. So a teacher of ours convinced our parents to sort of like let us have a year out and see if we could make a living out of writing computer games, whereas clearly a few £100 for things isn't going to make a living. So we left school, and in September of that sort of new year, which must have been about 86 I think, we met up with the Darling brothers, who were just leaving Mastertronics. They'd written a few games for Mastertronics, made quite a lot of money, and they wanted to go alone and publish their own games. But obviously, if they were more in the publishing now, they'd need programmers to write new games. So myself and Philip met them at the ECTS show in Hammersmith, and they said that if we were to write a game for them, they'd pay as much as £10,000 for a game for Amstrad and Spectrum, of which we were like, that's absolutely amazing. That's just a different ball game altogether to what we'd been writing. And so we went away from that, and within the next 6 weeks, we just worked and worked and worked, literally 18-hour days, and we made Super Robin Hood. We took it back to them, we got it out for Christmas, and it sold really well. The interesting thing was the sort of 10,000. When we went back with our kind of finished game saying, we've got this game, sort of, they said, well, let's sign a contract, and the contract is for royalties. It's not actually for £10,000. Sorry if we sort of led you down that route. And we were like, well, okay. Well, we've written it now, and we still want to give it to you and see if you can make a go of it. So, but it sold really well that Christmas, and we did get royalties sort of shortly after Christmas of about that amount, which that was our sort of setup to say, well, this is clearly a way you can make a proper job and living out of writing video games. And so we continued with games like Ghost Hunters, and then Dizzy, and then BMX Simulator, Grand Prix Simulator, another Dizzy, another Simulator, another Dizzy. And so it went on. And those were the kind of amounts of money that we were getting. And we were very happy for many years. I think we were at Codemasters for about 6 years or so, and we were famous for getting our games out every kind of 6 weeks. We'd have a new game, and we generally got them on lots of different platforms as well. Most people would write a game and it would only appear on a Commodore 64 or only on Spectrum, whereas we very quickly, we started off with the Super Robin Hood, just doing it on the Amstrad and getting it onto a Spectrum, but as soon as we got some money, we bought some more computers, we got a PC, and we'd go and buy other computers and plug it in and see if we get it working, and the natural thing was to port the game that we had onto those new computers. And this was when all of our friends had gone to university, they'd all left, so we had a few years of Billy No Mates, as I sort of joke, where we just programmed, and we were just really happy that our games were going to the top of the charts in the UK. And we were making quite a lot of money, and we thought this is going to be very good, setting us up. And it was. It set us up in the industry really well. We ported our games around lots of different systems, and we were kind of famous for that. But actually, we wrote in Z80, and a lot of the home computers were using Z80. So we instantly sort of ported our games to those because they were quite easy. But when it came to things like the Commodore 64, which was a big market, we generally found friends or people around Codemasters. There were lots of people who were sending in demos to Codemasters in those days, and you're going, oh, that's really good, it shows that they can program, but they hadn't got a finished game or fully finished game. So we'd meet these people and think, well, they're very talented, but they haven't actually got a game. But we said, well, do you want to try and copy our game from the Spectrum across to the Commodore 64? We had a few successes there, and then it went on to the ST and the Amiga came out. And it was funny because when the ST and Amiga came out, the graphics and everything went up in fidelity, and we just felt that it was too difficult for us to do. We were comfortable with the 8-bit machine, so we allowed other people who could, and they were little teams generally of very good artists and programmers, write Dizzy games and some other games on the ST and Amiga, but we were paying them to do so, and we hadn't really set it up as a proper limited company at that point. We were just going, well, we'll give you 500, £1,000 if you kind of do this or that, and after a while the money was getting up to 5,000 and even 10,000 for people who had produced very impressive demos but hadn't finished games. So, and they were just being given a sort of mission to make a very beautiful copy of this on the ST and Amiga, and it worked really well for us. But then obviously we realised that we ought to set up ourselves as a proper limited company and start to employ people, and that happened when the Nintendo came out, and things changed a lot when the console market came round, and we could see that there was quite a commitment. So we made Fantastic Dizzy on the Nintendo, and there was a little team of us making it, and even with the little team it still took a year to make, but effectively it was our swan song, and we always thought of it as that when we were making it. It was take all the Dizzy adventure games we've made up to date and see if you can make one very big adventure where all of the puzzles and all of the lands and all of the characters are all in one, and put it out as one big game on the Nintendo. And we did that. It took a year, and it won all sorts of awards in America, and it did fairly well. Critical wise, it didn't sell very well just because there was a lot of politics around Codemasters publishing on Nintendo without getting the official rights for licensing. And that's kind of where a relationship sort of broke down, because we were quite excited about publishing on consoles, whereas obviously there was political problems around that with Codemasters. So the reason that there was a lot of politics around the consoles, Codemasters had a great success, and we'd had great success with them, publishing games on the 8-bit and then the 16-bit computers, the ST, the Amiga, Commodore, Amstrad, and it was a case of you wrote a game, you published it, you didn't need the hardware manufacturer to approve it, you didn't pay them any royalties. The hardware manufacturer was selling the computer. They sell the Commodore 64 or the Commodore Amiga. That's where they made their money. What people do with it and what they publish on it was up to them. But these computers, by that time, were now costing £300, £400 for something like the Commodore Amiga, and Nintendo came in a very big and bold way with the Nintendo Entertainment System, and I believe it was about £99. It was really, really cheap. But produced really good games. Now the games were quite expensive, but they were just so easy to just push in, plug and play. And they were the games from the arcade. Quite literally, they were Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong, and they were absolutely identical. They were the same game. So you immediately thought, well, if I want to emulate the arcade, which everyone wanted to do, then they went that system. But they were selling it as a toy that was very cheap as a Christmas present, and then fairly expensive games. But the idea was that the games, the sales of the games subsidised the hardware. It's exactly like the printer market. When you buy a printer, it's really cheap, but they make their money from selling you the ink, and Nintendo changed the business model to that, and that's what all consoles use going forward. That even though these consoles now, you might look at consoles and say they're pretty expensive, they're incredibly powerful computers that cost an awful lot of money, and typically they try to sell them at pretty much break even, knowing that they'll make their money if the console's successful, and that means that they're selling a lot of games where they get royalties from the games. But that obviously for publishers means that all games have to be licensed and approved and pay a royalty, and that's the new business model. So things changed a lot. So in the early 8-bit days, we just worked from home. First off, it was a parents' home, but then obviously we started making money and bought our own house. But it was literally you just did what you wanted to do, and you took your masters to the publishers, and you published it, you got royalties. You didn't need any money up front. You could live off, well, not too much because you're just working from home, but then you'd live off the royalties from the last project. But as the consoles came in, it was all about getting teams, and teams weren't going to work out of our house. Well, they did for a little while actually, but you ended up having to rent an office. and then you get staff in, and then it becomes a sort of 9 to 5 job, and you realise that after you've got 10 or so people, you really ought to have somebody who's running admin, and it just changed into actually a proper regular job career, as opposed to before it was a well-earning hobby from home that made some fairly decent money. We always wanted to make games, and when you start off, you just make it yourself because you have to. You code it, you graphic it, and if you need some sound effects, you try and bodge them in. And it was kind of difficult. Now, obviously, we started to pay people around us to improve those areas, but we very much made those games. Now, once games started getting bigger, we started to employ other people, and very quickly, like I think our skill was not in programming or art, it was getting games finished and to market or whatever. And we found so many talented people who did the best demos in the world, but they never actually finished or sold games. But we thought, well, we can employ these people, we work as a team, and very quickly we realised that we were the project manager, or we were the ones who were going, we've got to ship. And certainly in those early days, there was an awful lot of people, sort of quite famous people, who just never seemed to get their games out. The games were never finished, or they'd run 6 months, even a year late. And it was ridiculous. Whereas we just had this work ethic and mentality. We would get the games out. And effectively, we just turned into project managers. I did code up till sort of halfway through the PlayStation 1 era. So I did write a lot of code, certainly all the 3D engine code that is in games like Chicken Run and Lilo and Stitch. But we very much ended up just being the project managers, ensuring that the game would hit deadlines. And we got a reputation for that, and that was good because film companies were very interested in sort of capitalising off the popularity of games and make a game that fits this film release or toy license. And we were very good at saying, right, you want it for September, you will have the best game we can make for X amount of money, which buys you a team of, say, 10 people for that day. And we never slipped, and we had a brilliant reputation for always being on-time delivery. We are very much the figureheads of our company, and everyone who works for us understands that we've got a history where we made a lot of games, and we did it all. And I think that does give you an underlying respect and make it easier to run a games company, because they kind of know that 10, 15 years ago, probably longer than that, you did this stuff and you did it sort of in a hardcore way. Whereas, and I've seen that there's a lot of other companies like Rebellion with the Kingsleys and Frontier with David Braben. Like, everyone in their company knows and respects that the bosses wrote games themselves, and they sat there the tireless hours and they fixed and did all the bugs and got things out. Whereas I've seen other people who have tried to set up software companies who have come across from other industries going, oh, I'm a music producer, but I'm doing quite well, I'm going to set up a games company. And there's just this underlying feeling from staff that they don't really understand games and they'll never really get it. And quite often it doesn't really work. So it does seem that there's just a sort of given respect that you understand it, but also it comes out in every day when you're directing people. You literally speak the same language. You may not be speaking C++, and I used to do Z80, but the types of algorithms and the problems that you're foreseeing are exactly what we had. They're just all doing it in 3D to a higher complexity. And so it does make a communication very understandable. So to finish the interview, a little bit about Dizzy. Obviously coming to a retro revival conference that I'm at today. It's quite cool and heartwarming to think that people still fondly remember Dizzy. It was 25 years ago or something of that era, and people still say they just loved playing it when they were kids and they still remember it, and I think that's just really nice that some of these things can live on for so long.